Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are embarking on a real philosophical detective story. We're going to dive right into the 1600-year-old intellectual resolutions of one of the absolute heavyweights in Western history, Augustine of Hippo. We'll be looking closely at how he tackled some of the most persistent, mind-bending paradoxes of human existence. We're talking about faith, the messy nature of free will, and the ultimate puzzle, the problem of evil. It's a completely fascinating journey, so let's get right to it. So here is our cognitive roadmap for today. We're going to start with the problem of evil, look at faith-seeking understanding, dive into evil as a privation, explore the price of free will, untangle foreknowledge from compulsion, and finally, trace the evolution of grace.
All right, part one, the problem of evil.
Now, this is the core paradox that deeply troubled Augustine, especially as he tried to wrap his head around the idea of an active, providential God. It's a devastating logical challenge, right? Think about it. If God is all-powerful, he could stop evil. If he is all good, he would absolutely want to stop it. And yet, evil clearly exists. For a long time, this sheer contradiction led Augustine into Manichaeanism. That was a dualistic religion that basically said, hey, there are two equal, competing cosmic forces out there, a good one and an evil one. But as Augustine evolved philosophically, he realized that accepting a rival evil force completely diminished God's sovereignty. He had to find a way to solve this riddle without conceding that evil is some independent positive power in the universe.
To crack this, Augustine first categorized the problem by dividing evil into two distinct buckets. First, you have moral evil. This is the stuff that happens when the human will deliberately makes a bad choice, things like pride, theft, hatred. Then, second, you have natural evil. This is the unchosen suffering, diseases, earthquakes, getting older. Now here's the absolute crucial takeaway. For Augustine, natural evil is actually a downstream consequence of moral evil. It only entered the picture because moral evil corrupted human nature and totally fractured our relationship with creation. So basically, to understand why we suffer, you first have to understand why free will went off the rails.
Moving on to part two, faith-seeking understanding.
Before we get to his actual solutions for the problem of evil, we kind of need to understand how Augustine approached knowing the truth in the first place. Because in our modern world, we usually demand hard proof before we believe anything. We want the receipts. But Augustine totally flipped this script. He completely rejected the pure rationalism of his day. He just didn't buy that you could reason your way up to God from scratch, especially given how flawed our human nature is. Instead, he championed something called intellectus fidei, the understanding of faith. He argued that we have to first trust the source if we want to fully comprehend the divine mystery. So faith isn't just some blind, wishful thinking. It's a valid, totally necessary epistemological stance. You literally have to believe first in order to see clearly later.
His entire mindset is perfectly captured in this famous phrase, faith seeks, understanding finds. Notice how faith comes first in time, but rational understanding is still the ultimate finish line for the believer. Augustine was not anti-intellectual by any stretch. He just firmly believed that our minds need to be morally purified and guided by divine revelation before our philosophy can actually do its job without wandering off a cliff.
Okay, part three, evil as a privation.
So, fun fact, Augustine didn't just have one single answer to the problem of evil. Over his lifetime, he actually offered 4 different angles. The epistemic theory says evil only looks like evil because we can't see God's massive master plan. The mutability theory argues that God gave us a changeable world as a gift of freedom, which just inevitably leaves the door open for evil. The free will theory blames our moral choices. But his most foundational, absolute, game-changing answer, the one that completely rewired Western philosophy, is the privation theory.
Here is the core of it. Augustine argued that evil is not a substance. It is not a thing. God created everything, and everything God created is good. Therefore, evil can't be a thing. It is a privatio boni, a privation, or a lack of goodness. Think about these analogies for a second. Sickness isn't a physical object you can extract from a body and put in a glass jar, right? It's just the absence of health. Darkness is literally just the absence of light. Or think of a glitchy, broken smartphone. That phone isn't suddenly filled with bad phone substance. It's just missing a crucial connection or a proper function. Evil is exactly like that. It's parasitic. It only exists as a deficit, a hole in something that was originally meant to be good.
Which brings us to part 4, the price of free will.
Now, you might be wondering, if evil is just a lack of goodness, how did a lack of goodness get into a perfect creation in the first place? Well, Augustine places the blame for moral evil squarely, 100%, on the choices of free creatures. God gave free will to angels and humans, and free will is an incredible good. Without it, we'd just be biological robots, totally incapable of genuine love or real virtue. But creatures with actual freedom unfortunately chose poorly. Driven by pride, which is really just the desire to be entirely self-sufficient, to be your own boss, they turned away from the highest good and turned toward a lesser good, themselves. God didn't cause this turning. He merely provided the capacity to choose. The rest was on us.
Augustine actually felt this very personally. In his incredibly famous autobiography, The Confessions, he tells the story about sneaking out as a teenager and stealing pears from a neighbor's tree. And here's the kicker. He wasn't even hungry. He didn't even want the pears. He literally threw them to the pigs. He stole them purely for the thrill of breaking the rules. I mean, come on, that is something most of us can relate to from our own rebellious teenage years, right? This completely nails his view of the unruly will. It shows the perverse potential of human freedom to just unchain itself from reason and goodness simply for the sake of being bad.
Next up, Part 5, Foreknowledge is not compulsion. This introduces a massive, massive philosophical headache. If God is all-knowing, doesn't he know exactly what we are going to choose before we even choose it? The Roman philosopher Cicero actually argued that if God knows in advance what's going to happen, then it absolutely must happen. And if it must happen, then we don't have any real freedom. But Augustine totally dismantles this. He draws a hard line between it will happen and it must happen. He basically says Cicero is confusing knowledge with necessity. Think about a weather forecast. When a meteorologist predicts that it's going to rain tomorrow, their prediction doesn't cause the rain. Knowing about an event in advance doesn't create the event.
Let's make this even more relatable. Say you know your best friend incredibly well. You might know with absolute 100% certainty that they are going to order tea instead of coffee at lunch. But your advanced knowledge doesn't force them to order the tea. They are freely choosing it. You just happen to be smart enough to know what they will freely choose. For Augustine, God's advanced knowledge simply anticipates our genuine, uncompelled choices. It doesn't destroy our agency at all.
Finally, Part 6, the evolution of grace.
Now, as Augustine got older and found himself in the middle of all these fierce theological debates, his own views on free will shifted pretty drastically. Back in his early days, he held what we call a libertarian view. He thought the human will was kind of like a neutral hinge. It could freely swing toward the good or swing toward the bad. But as the years went by, he concluded that original sin had severely rusted and damaged that hinge. By his late period, he was arguing fiercely against a group called the Pelagians, who basically thought humans could be perfectly good all on their own. Augustine pushed back hard, concluding that humanity's will was entirely broken. We needed God's prevenient grace, grace that arrives before we even ask for it, just to have the sheer ability to choose the good.
He knew all about this weakness of will, this akrotia, firsthand. Just before his own conversion, he was a wreck, completely torn between wanting a spiritual life and being hopelessly dragged down by his old worldly habits. Those bad habits had essentially transformed into an addictive necessity. He realized that humanity post-fall hadn't just made a single bad choice. We had actually lost the simple ability not to sin. We are stuck in a permanent state of weakness, and only divine intervention, only God's grace can heal the will and give us back our true freedom.
And that brings us to our conclusion.
Throughout this whole explainer, we've seen how Augustine completely shifted the blame for evil off of the Creator and dropped it squarely onto the shoulders of free creatures. So I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. If evil truly is not some dark substance, and it's not some opposing cosmic force, but simply a privation, a lack of the good that ought to be there, caused by our own misuse of freedom, does that fundamentally change how you view your everyday moral responsibilities? I mean, if every evil act is really just a good thing malfunctioning, how much power do we actually have to step up and repair those broken connections? It's a profound, deeply challenging question that has shaped Western thought for 16 centuries, and it is definitely still worth pondering today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.